At Christmas dinner, my mom stared me down and said, "You're just deadweight. Get out of this house." For 10 years, I had sent her money while stationed overseas. Now, injured and exhausted, I was treated like a stranger. That night, I caught a late bus to my grandma's farm. When she opened the door, she said 5 words that completely crushed me. The Christmas turkey was still warm when my mother's words froze the air between us. "You're a burden. Get out of my house." 8 years of military service, the scars I carried, both visible and hidden, meant nothing in that moment. As I stood at the bus stop, snow collecting on my duffel bag, I realized families aren't always built on love. Sometimes they're constructed from perfect lies. What my mother never understood was that breaking someone doesn't destroy them. It creates something new, something dangerous, a person with nothing left to lose and a lifetime of buried truths waiting to be unearthed. She thought casting me out would silence me. Instead, it set me free to discover who I really was and the sister she tried to erase from both our lives. The bus rattled to a stop in front of the familiar 2-story colonial house, its windows glowing with warm light against the December dusk. I stood on the sidewalk, my duffel bag heavy in my grip, not from its contents, but from what this homecoming represented. 10 years in the military, an honorable but medical discharge, and now what? I took a deep breath that stung my lungs in the cold air and walked up the pathway. Before I could knock, the doors swung open. "Evelyn," my mother said, her voice neither warm nor cold, just politely distant. "You're later than you said you'd be." No hug. No welcome home. No acknowledgement of the scar that ran from my temple to my jaw, a souvenir from my last deployment. "Traffic," I mumbled, though there hadn't been any. I'd sat at a coffee shop for 2 hours, delaying the inevitable. Belia, my mother had always insisted I call her by her first name since I turned 18, stood aside to let me enter. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon, the scent of a perfect Christmas that existed only in her carefully curated world. "Your room is, well, I've had to use it for storage since you've been gone so long. You can sleep on the pullout in the den." She turned away, moving back toward the kitchen where I could hear pots bubbling. "Dinner's at 7. Family will start arriving at 6. I stood in the foyer, surrounded by the same paintings, the same side table with a crystal dish for keys, the same mirror that now reflected a stranger back at me. 10 years had changed me in ways invisible to Delia, who'd already disappeared around the corner, her footsteps fading down the hallway. The den was small, with a worn leather couch that had been converted into a bed with military precision, hospital corners on sheets that smelled like they'd just been washed. At least there was that. I dropped my bag and went to find what used to be my bedroom. The door was ajar, and I pushed it open to find cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling, old clothes hanging from a rack, and Christmas decorations spilling out of plastic bins. Nothing remained of my childhood, not the posters, not the bookshelf, not even the blue paint I'd chosen when I was 12. It was as if I'd never existed here at all. By 6, the house filled with voices and forced laughter. Uncle James and Aunt Patricia arrived first with their college-age sons, followed by Delia's book club friends, who'd somehow earned family status during my absence. Everyone greeted me with awkward smiles and 2 firm handshakes. "So brave," Aunt Patricia said, patting my arm. "But what will you do now, dear?" "Surely not security work. That's so dangerous." "I haven't decided," I answered, though I'd spent months researching programs for veterans, possibilities that might give my life purpose again. "Well, you can always go back to school," Uncle James offered, as if I hadn't already earned my degree through night classes between deployments. I nodded, smiling tightly, already exhausted from the small talk. I found myself drifting to the edges of the room, watching the interactions like I was behind class. They discussed promotions and vacations and renovation plans. I sipped my water and thought about the dust of Baghdad, the weight of my pack, the friends who'd become family more than anyone in this room had ever been. The front door burst open at 6:30, bringing a gust of cold air and my younger sister Violet's high-pitched laughter. She entered like a queen, draped in an expensive-looking coat, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the winter wind. Behind her, a tall man with broad shoulders and a square jaw followed, carrying a designer shopping bag. "Mom," Violet squealed, embracing Delia with dramatic flair. "Sorry we're late. The traffic was just awful. Wasn't it, Brandon?" Brandon nodded, his practiced smile revealing perfect teeth. "Absolute nightmare." "Violet." Delia beamed, taking her daughter's hands. "You're positively glowing." Violet's smile widened as she placed one manicured hand on her still flat stomach. "Well, we were going to wait until after dinner, but I just can't keep it in anymore." She looked around the room, ensuring all eyes were on her. Brandon and I are expecting. The room erupted in congratulations and questions about due dates and morning sickness. I stood frozen, watching the scene unfold like a play I wasn't cast in. When Violet finally noticed me in the corner, her smile faltered for just a moment before recovering. "Evelyn," she said, crossing the room to give me a quick, perfume-scented hug. "Glad you could make it home for once." "Congratulations," I said, meaning it despite the sting of her words. "Thanks," she replied, already turning back to the adoring crowd. "Brandon's parents are thrilled. They're already planning the nursery at their Aspen house for when we visit." Dinner was served at precisely 7, with everyone seated around the large oak table that had been in our family for generations. I was placed at the far end, next to one of Delia's book club friends whose name I'd already forgotten. Violet sat beside our mother, Brandon on her other side, the three of them forming a perfect family portrait. "So, Evelyn," Delia said during a lulling conversation, her voice carrying down the table. "Violet was just telling me about her promotion at the firm. She's the youngest senior account executive they've ever had." I nodded, taking a bite of dry turkey. "That's great. Bye." "And Brandon's company just went public," Delia continued. "They're looking at houses in Briarwood Estates." "Good for them," I said, trying to keep the edge from my voice. "It's such a shame," Delia said, speaking to the table rather than to me, "when people don't reach their potential." Violet always knew exactly what she wanted. The implication hung in the air like smoke. I gripped my fork tighter. 8 years of military service, I said quietly. I wanted to serve my country. Violet laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "You just ran away for a paycheck, Evie. Let's be honest." I felt heat rise to my face. "I sent half my pay home every month for 6 years. I helped put you through college." "No one asked you to," Violet snapped. "Girls," Delia warned, but her eyes were fixed on me. The table had gone silent. "I'm sorry my choices don't meet your approval," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "But I did what I thought was right." "You've always been this way," Delia said, setting down her wine glass with deliberate care. "Difficult. Moody. Disappointing." The word landed like a physical blow. Disappointing. After everything I'd survived, everything I'd sacrificed, I was still just a disappointment to her. "I don't think," I began, but Delia wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her eyes cold as she delivered the final strike. "You're a burden. Get out of my house." The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. No one defended me. I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I looked around at the faces, some embarrassed, some averted, none meeting my eyes. Not even Violet. Not even Russell, my mother's husband of 15 years, who stared down at his plate as if the answers to everything lay in his mashed potatoes. "Merry Christmas," I said to no one in particular and walked out. Not my room, the den, I grabbed my duffel bag, still packed because some part of me had known this would happen. Outside, snow had begun to fall, dusting the perfect suburban street with white. I walked to the bus station, the only sound the crunch of my boots and my own ragged breathing. The station was nearly empty on Christmas Eve, just a few stragglers with nowhere else to go. I bought a ticket for the last bus heading north toward the only place that had ever truly felt like home, Grandma Clara's farm. As I settled into the hard plastic seat, watching the town lights fade behind us, I felt something I hadn't expected, relief. Like I'd finally put down a weight I'd been carrying for years. Whatever waited for me at Clara's farm, it couldn't be worse than what I'd left behind. The bus dropped me off at the edge of town near midnight. The snow had stopped, leaving a pristine blanket over the fields and trees. I walked the last mile to Clara's farm, my breath clouding in the frigid air, my boots crunching a solitary path through the untouched white. The farmhouse appeared over the hill at the lighthouse, a single warm light glowing from the kitchen window. As I approached, the porch light flickered on, and the door opened. Clara stood there, tall and straight despite her 78 years, silver hair loose around her shoulders. "I knew you'd come," she said simply, holding out her arms. I fell into her embrace, feeling the strength in her thin frame as she guided me inside. Without asking questions, she sat me by the wood stove, wrapped a handmade quilt around my shoulders, and put a mug of spiced cider in my hands. "Drink," she said, "then sleep. Tomorrow was time enough for talking." The guest room was just as I remembered, clean pine furniture, quilts stacked at the foot of the bed, windows that would show rolling fields come morning. I fell asleep to the distant hooting of an owl and the creaking of the old house settling into night. Morning came with a smell of coffee and bacon. I found Clara in the kitchen, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who has learned to conserve energy as they age. Eggs are almost ready, she said, not turning around. There's coffee in the pot. We ate in comfortable silence, sunshine streaming through windows that needed washing. Clara had always been a woman of few, carefully chosen words. Where Delia filled every silence with criticism disguised as conversation, Clara let quiet exist as its own form of communication. The chickens need feeding, she said when we'd finished, and theirs would need stacking by the back door. I nodded, grateful for the simple, physical tasks. Outside, the winter air was sharp and clean, the world silent except for the chickens clucking impatiently in their coop. I fell into the rhythm of farm chores easily, muscle memory from childhood summers spent here while Delia found herself through various relationships and career changes. By afternoon, I'd fed the animals, stacked wood, and helped Clara sort seeds for spring planting. My body ached, but it was the good kind of pain that comes from useful work. There's more I could use help with, Clara said. In the attic. Some boxes need moving. The attic stairs creaked under our weight as we climbed. Dust motes danced in shafts of light coming through the small dormer windows. Clara pointed to a stack of boxes near the chimney. Those need to go over by the east wall, she said. Mind the floor joists. As I moved the first box, something slipped from between the cardboard and fell to the floor with a metallic clank. A small, tarnished lockbox. Clara reached into her apron pocket and produced an old brass key. I've been keeping this safe, she said quietly, waiting for the right time. What's this? I asked, picking it up. Clara stared at it for a long moment before answering. Oh, thanks. Best left alone for now. But as I continued moving boxes, a worn leather-bound book slipped from one of them, falling open to reveal yellow pages filled with handwriting I didn't recognize. A photograph fluttered out, faded, its edges worn. I picked it up and felt the world tilt beneath me. The photo showed a baby, me, I was sure of it, cradled in the arms of a man I'd never seen before. He was young, maybe 25, with dark hair and a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. My eyes. On the back, written in faded ink, Jude and Evelyn, 3 months. Who is this? I asked, my voice strange in my ears. Clara took the photo gently from my hands, her face unreadable. You should rest first, she said. Then we'll talk. Clara, who is this man? I insisted, pointing at the photograph she now held protectively. Later, she said firmly. Some things need proper telling. That night, I couldn't sleep. The photo had awakened questions I'd never thought to ask. Russell had been my mother's husband since I was 5. I'd always assumed he was my father, though he'd never acted like one. He'd been a distant figure, always deferring to Delia in matters concerning Violet and me. Just after midnight, I heard Clara's voice, low and urgent. I crept to the hallway and saw her on the old rotary phone, half turned away. She found the picture, Clara was saying. Yes, of Jude. No, I haven't told her yet. It has to be done right this time. When she hung up, I stepped into view. Who are you talking to? Clara didn't look surprised to see me. An old friend, she said. Go back to bed, Evelyn. The next morning brought a visitor. A truck pulled up the long driveway, and a tall man with broad shoulders and work-roughened hands came to the door. He looked to be in his early 40s with sun-creased eyes and a quiet demeanor. Morning, Clara, he said, then turned to me with a flash of recognition in his eyes that he quickly masked. You must be Evelyn. I'm Roan. I help Clara with a heavy work around here. Nice to meet you, I said, studying his face. Have we met before? Don't think so, he replied, but his eyes didn't quite meet mine. I'd remember. While Roan fixed the leak in the barn roof, Clara handed me the keys to her old pickup truck. Take this into town for groceries, she said. I called ahead. Roan will meet you there later to help you get back, since you're not familiar with the roads yet. The general store was little more than a large room with essentials lining the shelves, but it served the scattered farms in the area. As I placed my items on the counter, the gray-haired woman behind the register stared at me with undisguised curiosity. You're Clara's granddaughter, she said. It wasn't a question. I am, I replied, counting out bills. The daughter who came back, she added, with a meaningful look I couldn't interpret. I'm just visiting, I said, uncomfortable under her scrutiny. She hummed, bagging my groceries with deliberate slowness. Funny how things circle back around, isn't it? Back at the farm, I found Clara sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded in front of her. The lockbox sat between us, now open with the brass key beside it. Sit down, Evelyn, she said. It's time we talked. My heart pounded as I took the chair across from her. Clara's eyes, the same deep blue as mine, held a mixture of resolve and regret. Your father, she said, her voice steady but soft, isn't who you think. 5 simple words that demolished the already shaky foundation of my life. What do you mean? I asked, though part of me already knew. Clara sighed, a deep sound that seemed to come from her very soul. I mean, Russell Thompson is not your father. Never was. Then who? I began, but she held up one weathered hand. Some truths have to unfold on their own, she said. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out an old brass key. There's a room in the back of the barn. Locked. This opens it. I stared at the key in her palm. What's in there? Your history, she said simply. Go see. The walk to the barn felt eternal. Inside, past the stalls where Clara kept her 2 elderly horses, was a door I'd never noticed before. It was built into the back wall, nearly invisible against the weathered wood. The key turned with a heavy click. The small room had been carefully sealed and preserved. A metal desk with a reading lamp, shelves lined with books and boxes, and in the center, a wooden trunk with my name carved into its lid. Everything was wrapped in protective cloth and stored in airtight containers. Clara had taken great care to preserve these memories against time and moisture. Inside, I found stacks of letters tied with faded ribbon, their envelopes addressed to me but never sent. A journal bound in soft leather with the name Wren embossed on its cover. Family records, birth certificates, hospital records, school reports, some I recognized as mine, others for someone named Wren Bennett, born 3 years before me. I opened the first letter with trembling hands. The handwriting was bold, slanting slightly to the right. My dearest Evelyn, today you turned 5. I stood across the street from your school and watched you run to your mother's car. Your hair in pigtails, your backpack almost as big as you are. You looked happy. I hope you're happy. I dream of the day I can wish you happy birthday in person, but until then, know that I think of you every day. I love you more than you can imagine. Your father, Jude. Letter after letter chronicled birthdays, holidays, achievements he'd somehow known about despite never being present. 8 years' worth of letters from a father I never knew existed, full of love and regret and a desperate longing to be part of my life. The journal was something else entirely. It belonged to someone named Wren, a sister, I realized with growing shock. The entries began when she was 15, full of teenage angst and observations about life with Delia. There were sketches throughout, landscapes, portraits, abstract designs, all showing remarkable talent. I recognized some of the drawings. They matched sketches I'd found hidden in my room as a child, drawings I'd assumed were from a previous occupant. Delia had taken them away when I showed her, saying they were just trash. With the journal and letters clutched to my chest, I returned to the house. Clara sat where I'd left her, as if she hadn't moved in the hours I'd been gone. Who is Wren? I demanded, my voice shaking. And who is Jude? Clara closed her eyes briefly, then looked at me with a steady gaze. Wren is your sister. Your full sister. Jude Bennett is your father. Your real father. He was the love of your mother's life in college, but her parents didn't approve. He was poor, from a working-class family. They wanted better for Delia. So she just left him? Even though she was pregnant? Clara nodded. With Wren, yes. Jude didn't know until after Wren was born. By then, Delia had told everyone the father had abandoned her. Her parents set her up in an apartment in the city, helped her finish school. When Wren was 3, Delia went back to Jude for one night. You were conceived, but Delia never told him. My head was spinning. But you knew. I knew, Clara confirmed. Jude and I stayed in touch. When you were small, I used to bring you here for visits. You'd play with Wren while Jude and I talked on the porch. You were too young to remember. Delia allowed this? I asked, disbelieving. Clara's face hardened. She didn't know. Until she did. When you were 4, she found out. She threatened to cut me off completely. I'd never see you or Wren again if I continued. I had to choose between seeing you on Delia's terms or not at all. What happened to Wren? I asked, thinking of the journal entries that stopped abruptly when Wren was 17. Clara's eyes grew distant with pain. There was an incident. Delia had a breakdown one night. Wren got the worst of it. She was hospitalized, then institutionalized. Delia told everyone Wren had mental health issues, but it was Delia. I finished, sick to my stomach. Where is Wren now? I asked. I don't know, Clara admitted, her voice breaking for the first time. She was released from the institution 7 years ago when she turned 21, but she disappeared. I've been looking ever since. I sat in stunned silence, trying to process everything. A father who loved me from afar for my entire life. A sister I couldn't remember. A mother who had systematically erased them both from my history. I need to find her, I said finally. I need to find them both. Clara nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes, she said. It's time. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into the search. Margaret Wilson, Clara's lawyer, helped us gather records and trace leads. We found Jude first, living quietly in Oregon, working as a carpenter, never having married, never having other children. When I called him for the first time, he cried. When he said my name, really said it, not as a stranger, but as a father who had loved me from afar for 30 years, I cried too. I never stopped looking for you, he said. Never stopped hoping. Finding Rin proved more difficult. The institutional records were sealed, and she had seemingly vanished after her release. But Clara's determination was fierce, and slowly, we pieced together clues. A neighbor who remembered her, a store clerk who'd seen someone matching her description, an art teacher who'd bought paintings from a woman who went by W. Bennett. The trail led to a small cabin in the mountains, hidden away from the world. When we finally found her, she was exactly as I'd imagined from her journal, tall and thin, with dark hair and my same blue eyes, but older, wirier, marked by years of surviving on her own. She was terribly terrified at first, convinced that Delia had sent us. But when Clara stepped forward, arms outstretched, Rin collapsed into her grandmother's embrace like a child finding safety after a long nightmare. I thought you'd forgotten me, she whispered. Never, Clara said fiercely. Never. The first few weeks with Rin were delicate, like tending to a wounded bird. She startled at sudden noises, flinched when anyone moved too quickly, and kept the packed bag by her bed as if ready to flee at any moment. The years of hiding had left their mark, not just the physical scars from Delia's abuse, but the deeper wounds of believing she was unwanted, forgotten, erased. I used to watch the farm from the ridge, she told me one evening as we sat on Clara's porch, sharing a pot of tea. Especially during holidays. I'd see the lights in the windows and imagine what it would be like to belong somewhere again. Her art studio in the barn became her sanctuary. Canvases lined the walls, some depicting the dark years of her exile, shadowy figures and broken landscapes, while others showed glimpses of hope, sunrise over mountains, birds taking flight, hands reaching toward light. Watching her paint was like watching someone slowly remember how to breathe. I kept painting you, she said, showing me a series of portraits spanning decades. Even when I wasn't sure you were real anymore, I painted you. It was the only way to keep you close. The paintings showed me at different ages, graduating high school, in my military uniform, receiving commendations I'd never told anyone about. Somehow, through newspaper clippings and distant observation, she chronicled my life from afar. How did you know about the Bronze Star ceremony? I asked, studying a painting that captured me standing at attention, the medal pinned to my chest. I was there, she said quietly. In the crowd. I wanted to be proud of my sister, even if she didn't know I existed. The revelation shattered something inside me. All those years, thinking I was alone, she'd been watching, caring, celebrating my achievements from the shadows. I pulled her into a fierce hug, both of us crying for the lost time, the missed moments, the sisterhood we'd been denied. As winter deepened, we began the painstaking process of rebuilding our relationship. Rin showed me her journals from the years after her release, page after page documenting her struggle to understand what had happened to our family, her desperate search for answers about Jude, her fear that Delia would find her again. I hired a private investigator once, she said, sitting cross-legged on her bed as snow fell outside. Saved up for months from selling paintings at local markets. He found some information about Jude, but when I tried to contact him, the letters came back undelivered. Turns out Delia had been intercepting them, having his mail forwarded to AP. Box she controlled. The depths of our mother's manipulation continued to astound me. She hadn't just separated us, she'd actively worked to keep us apart, even after Rin's institutionalization. Bank records Margaret uncovered showed regular payments to a private investigator, ensuring she'd know if Rin or Jude ever tried to contact me through official channels. She was terrified of losing control, Rin observed, studying copies of the investigator's reports. Look at this. She had someone monitoring your base's public events, watching for any family members who might show up. She was obsessed with maintaining her version of reality. The surveillance had extended to monitoring my public military achievements as well. Delia had somehow obtained copies of press releases about my unit's deployments and commendations through what appeared to be internet searches and public records requests. When I received the Purple Heart after being injured by an IED, the ceremony had been covered by the base newspaper, publicly available information that she'd used to torment Jude. She called me, Jude revealed during one of our long phone conversations. After you were wounded, taunted me with details about your injuries, said it was my fault for not being there to protect you. I nearly broke down and tried to find you then, but I was afraid she'd hurt you worse if I interfered. The psychological torment Delia had inflicted on Jude was systematic and cruel. She'd sent him copies of newspaper clippings about my graduation, my commissioning ceremony, my awards, always with handwritten notes about how I'd achieved these things without him, how I'd never needed a father, how he was nothing more than a biological accident in my life. I kept every letter, every photo, he said during one of our video calls. Even the cruel ones. They were the only connection I had to you. When spring arrived, bringing with it the promise of renewal, we decided it was time to confront Delia directly, not in anger or for revenge, but to force her to face the truth of what she'd done, to take away her power to hurt us with lies and manipulation. Margaret arranged a deposition, officially recorded and legally binding. For the first time in over a decade, the four of us, Jude, Run, Clara, and I, would be in the same room as Delia, facing her together. She arrived impeccably dressed as always, her lawyer flanking her like a protective shield. But something had changed in her face during the months since Christmas dinner. The perfect mask had slipped slightly, revealing the fear beneath. This is harassment, she declared before anyone had spoken. I'm a victim here, not a perpetrator. My daughters are mentally unstable, influenced by. Mrs. Thompson, Margaret interrupted smoothly. We haven't asked you any questions yet. The deposition lasted 4 hours. Under oath, with cameras rolling, Delia was forced to confront evidence of her abuse, her manipulation, her systematic destruction of our family. Financial records showed the bribes paid to doctors, the surveillance fees, the legal costs of keeping Rin institutionalized against medical advice. You hired investigators to monitor your own daughter, Margaret stated, sliding a bank record across the table. $3,000 a month for 2 years to a private security firm, with instructions to report on Rin Bennett's activities and prevent any contact with family members. I was protecting her, Delia insisted, but her voice lacked conviction. She was dangerous, unstable. According to whom? Margaret pressed. Dr. Harrison, the psychiatrist who treated her, has submitted an affidavit stating that Rin showed no signs of dangerous behavior and was, in his opinion, a victim of systematic abuse. As the questions continued, Delia's composure cracked further. When confronted with recordings of her threats against Clara, photos of Rin's injuries that had been documented by social workers, and bank records showing payments to silence potential witnesses, she finally broke. They were trying to destroy me, she screamed, her perfect facade shattering completely. Jude wanted to take them away from me, turn them against me. I did what any mother would do. I protected my children. By having one of them institutionalized on false charges? Margaret asked calmly. By keeping them safe from a man who would have ruined their lives. Delia shot back. Look what happened to Evelyn, running off to the military, getting herself blown up, coming home scarred and broken. That's what his influence would have done to both of them. The words hung in the air like poison. Even Delia seemed to realize she'd gone too far, revealing the depth of her narcissism and her complete inability to see us as anything other than extensions of herself. So you admit, Margaret said quietly, that you deliberately separated these children from their father and from each other? Delia's lawyer tried to intervene, but she was beyond listening to advice. I gave them everything, she snarled. A perfect home, the best schools, opportunities they never would have had with him. And this is how they repay me, turning me into a monster, twisting everything I did out of love into something ugly. That was the moment I truly understood the depth of her delusion. In her mind, she genuinely believed she was the victim, that her actions had been motivated by love rather than control. She couldn't see that love doesn't require the destruction of other relationships, that protection doesn't come through lies and manipulation. After the deposition, we sat in Margaret's office, emotionally drained but relieved. The truth was finally on record, officially documented and undeniable. This should be enough for criminal charges, Margaret said, reviewing the transcript. The evidence of fraud, abuse, and conspiracy is overwhelming. But prosecution would mean more hearings, more confrontations, more months of having Delia's toxicity poison our newfound peace. We made the decision to pursue civil remedies instead, financial restitution for the years of therapy we'd all need, compensation for Jude's lost relationship with his daughters, and most importantly, a legal mandate that Delia could never contact any of us again. The settlement negotiations took weeks, but eventually Delia agreed to everything rather than face a public trial. Her perfect reputation, the thing she'd valued more than her own children's well-being, would remain intact in exchange for her complete removal from our lives. The reunion with Jude came a week later. He flew in from Oregon, this gray-haired man who was my father, who had loved me through letters never sent and dreams never fulfilled. When he saw Ren and me together, he broke down completely. "My girls," he kept saying. "My beautiful girls." The legal battle against Delia took months. With Margaret's help, we compiled evidence of abuse, fraud, and systematic manipulation. Ren's testimony was crucial. She had kept records, had documented everything in ways that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. The trial was brutal. Delia maintained her innocence to the end, painting herself as a mother who'd done her best under difficult circumstances. But the evidence was overwhelming. She was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Violet visited me once during the proceedings. She was different, smaller, somehow withdrawn, as if seeing the truth about our mother had deflated something inside her. The confident, sharp-tongued woman from Christmas dinner was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost and questioning. "I've been thinking about everything," she said, sitting across from me in Clara's kitchen. "Things I dismissed, excuses I made. I remember now, times when you try to tell me something was wrong, and I just ignore it. I thought you were being dramatic." She twisted her hands in her lap, her usual perfect manicure chipped and neglected. Brandon knew some of it. About Ren. He'd heard rumors from his parents' social circle. They'd known Delia for years. When I confronted him after the deposition, he admitted he'd always wondered why I never talked about having another sister. The revelation that her husband had kept this knowledge from her seemed to be the final straw in Violet's carefully constructed world. "I left him," she said quietly. "Not just because of that, but because I realized I don't even know who I am without her influence. I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect for her, and I don't know what I actually want or believe." Spring came to Clara's farm as we settled into our new reality. Jude moved into the old caretaker's cottage, finally close to his daughters after 30 years of separation. Ren set up an art studio in the barn, her paintings growing brighter and more hopeful with each passing day. I began writing first letters to fellow veterans I'd served with, then articles for military publications, eventually a book about family trauma and institutional betrayal. The story resonated with readers, opening conversations about abuse, manipulation, and the courage it takes to seek truth. On Clara's 80th birthday, we gathered around her kitchen table, for generations of a family that had been broken and rebuilt. Jude carved the turkey while Ren arranged flowers from her garden. I watched my father and sister, marveling at how love had endured through decades of separation. "What will you have done differently?" I asked Clara as we cleaned up. She considered this, her weathered hands gentle on the dishes. "I would have fought harder," she said finally. "I would have trusted that love is stronger than fear." "You did fight," I said. "You kept us connected, even when we couldn't see it. You preserved the truth until we were ready to hear it." That night, as snow began to fall again, the first of another winter, I sat by the fire with Ren and Jude, sharing stories and filling in the gaps of our lost years. Outside, the wind howled, but inside we were warm, safe, finally home. The journey from that Christmas dinner to this moment had been long and painful, but it had led us here, to truth, to each other, to the family we were always meant to be. Delia had tried to erase us, to control the narrative of our lives, but in the end, love had proven stronger than her lies. Sometimes the greatest gift isn't what we receive, but what we have the courage to seek. And sometimes, home isn't where you come from. It's where you finally find the truth about who you really are.